Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And we're going to continue looking at the kings of Israel and Judah. It's going to be this study as we start to go through this chronology of the kings. It's going to be interesting. But before we do, let's have a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for this day, for all your blessings, for the time that we have, and the task before us. We know, Lord, that as we've had the daylight change for some of us. It's difficult to think this early in the morning, but we ask, Lord, that your Spirit can fill our hearts and minds and that you can bring to our attention the things that we need to pay attention to. We are thankful, Lord, for how you are working in our lives, how you are teaching us, guiding us, and leading us. When we pray for others, Lord, who are searching for truth, we know there's many barriers that we put up, our sins being not the least of them. And so we ask for forgiveness and your power in our lives. Help us to see clearly our weakness and to depend upon your strength. So be with us now. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so, back in 2010, when I came into this movement, I had been interested in biblical chronology. Being a Seventh-day Adventist and somebody who's studious, I liked looking at, calendars, and I knew the date, for instance, for the crucifixion of Christ was April 27th, 31 AD. I had actually read a paper or book, I guess, by Vance Farrell back in the 80s where he did a study on it. So I was aware how the biblical calendar worked. And I did study in university. I studied actually the history of the kings of Judah and Israel. Now, I didn't remember much of it. One of the things that I had problems with is we weren't doing the chronology. We were doing the names of the kings of Judah and Israel and the history. And I didn't have a context in which to place all of these stories. I remember reading Uncle Arthur's Bible story books to my kids. And I don't think those actually helped, even though they have pictures and stuff like that. You can't have a book without pictures in it. It's just, all the characters looked the same, right? There wasn't you couldn't tell much difference between the different kings. They all kind of had the same beards, there wasn't this, you couldn't really define the characters. They just kind of all blurred. And they're all just in apostasy and God's condemning them and there's battles and things like that, right? Now, when I studied biblical chronology, and especially when I started piecing through the kings of Judah and Israel, I still didn't have a clear picture of the characters, of the narrative. There I was just addressing the skeleton, the chronology. And the way that we do it with the kings of Judah and Israel is it's like a ladder. You have these rungs of, you're comparing when a king of Judah began to reign in relation to the year of the reign of the king of Israel and vice versa. And so when you do that, you have to put in certain types of assumptions. That is, if we just add up the reigns of the kings of Judah, we actually have already, and this is what I noticed after I had done all of this work, is that the reigns of the kings of Judah, for the most part, are just meant to tally one upon the other. They're already adjusted for, you don't have to take into account, is it accession year dating or not, right? Or not non-accession year dating. You don't have to take into account the details because the Bible writers have already adjusted that for you. So actually it's fairly simple in some ways. Now there are a few difficulties here and there. That is because there is one co-regency of 2 years, which they don't say it's a co-regency of 2 years, but if you look at the relationship with the king of Israel, then you can see that. We also have a place where it's going to be, well, you have some places where there's spaces, right? So these two interregnums, or years of anarchy for northern Israel. And then you have in the time when you're dealing with the fall of northern Israel, it's a little bit confusing, because normally what you're going to have, and this we will find out as we go through this, is that the kings of Judah are going to be counting their reign spring to spring, and the kings of Israel counting their reigns fall to fall. But somewhere along the line, they both start counting their reigns fall to fall. And I think that's actually in the time of Ahaz. At least by the time of Hezekiah, we know that they are. And when we get there, we will see. Now, I don't know if this is going to be enjoyable for you guys or not, but I think that what we're going to do in this study as we go through this part of First Kings and then Second Kings. Now, one is we have to match things up with the Book of Chronicles. So that's going to take, to see some of the details that are in the Book of Chronicles that aren't in the Book of Kings. But I think what the approach that we have, and you guys can agree or disagree or have some thoughts on it, but because we've gone through things in such a painstaking way and in a meaningful way, that is, we're not just dealing with the stories, we're dealing with the symbols and the parallels, that obviously we can't neglect the chronology. But I think this will be, at least for me, the first time that I will have a complete picture, that I'll have not just the chronological skeleton to hang the story on, but I'll actually be able to hang the story onto the chronology. That is, it will be fleshed out the sinews and the muscles and the organs and the skin, and everything will then be on this body, right? This anatomy. We'll have the whole full picture. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's really good we're doing such a thorough job, even though it is slow.
Yeah. Yes. But the idea that we're going to understand the chronology, not just as some theoretical sum of numbers that, Stephen and I have put in a chart, but that we'll be able to sort of navigate through it. Dwight, you had a comment? Okay. Yes, not. Right. So that's my hope. Now, obviously, we're not neglecting the application of these stories. But as I've thought about it, I don't quite know how, because in every one of the studies we did, when we did the study on Judges, we had a model or a key in which we could unlock that the period of the Judges was addressing the history of this movement from 2001 to 2023, right? The history we were just in at the end of that. And then when we dealt with the story of Samuel, so when we got to the story of Samuel, so that near the end of the Judges, right, we saw that there was this parallel with Millerite history, and then we could take Saul, David, and Solomon, and we could see them as each having their own line, but also part of a bigger line. We still haven't completed that, but we will at some point. I'm not sure when or how that's going to happen, but I think we're learning things that we need to learn. Now, this may seem a little bit off base, but so I've been doing a lot of preparation in that book dealing with the calendar, the astronomical basis for the calendar, God's celestial clock. Lots of reading and studying. And it's kind of interesting because I deal with a lot of the mathematics. And there was a video I watched, I think it was Stephen Meyer, and there was two other guys, David Berlinski and one other guy, I can't think of his name. He had a strange name. But anyway, they were talking about mathematics. And one of the things that mathematics is evidence of God is that much of the mathematics that we have that scientists use today was actually developed as pure math before it was used in physics. That is, the math exists not because of the physics, but because of the math itself. And so when we look at our stories, there is a foundation that God has given us that we don't fully comprehend its application, right? Just like there was mathematics that existed, like tensor calculus and stuff, that could then be used in Einstein's theory of relativity. But it existed before. You had mathematicians figuring out all kinds of mathematical rules, but no practical thing in which they were applying it. It was just basically pure math. And so we have as a foundation for what we're doing. What is the foundation? What is the key? What is the basic part that we need that now is being put into place, that's being put into practice, being used? I know that's kind of a cryptic question. So let's look at it this way. The purpose of this movement is primarily what is the main contribution of this movement to the unfolding of light? What has this movement brought? What has it done? What was its purpose? What was the whole purpose of FFA and all of these dates and everything? What was it to show? What was it to do?
Well, I think that we should remain grounded on Daniel 8:13.
Okay, well, yeah, so you're talking about Palmoni.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, that's part of it, definitely. And Palmoni did what? What was the primary purpose of Palmoni? What door did it unlock?
Well, as we often say, the commencement of the prophetic chain.
Okay. Yeah, so when we had something that was sealed up in Revelation 10, like in Millerite history, what's unsealed? Millerite history, what was unsealed? What book was open?
Daniel.
Daniel, right? In our history, what's unsealed?
Again, Daniel.
The seven thunders are unsealed.
The seven thunders are unsealed, but Daniel is even more unsealed.
Yes, but specifically, we have the seven thunders. Those aren't unsealed in Millerite history. They're sealed up, right? Yeah, so Daniel is unsealed. A part of Daniel that because there's a parallel there. But it's the unsealing of the seven thunders. That was the purpose of this movement. And of course, that's Palmoni that did it. Without the insight that came from Ezra 7:9 regarding the first day of the first month and the first day of the fifth month, we couldn't have gone down this track. Now, I think that's why it's significant that Jeff abandons that light, right? Because he knows where that light leads. He says that was false light, right? To look at Daniel, Ezra 7:9. He doesn't say that explicitly, but if he's saying everything since 2012 was false light that didn't come from him, and he rejects the symbolic use of numbers or dates specifically in that way, that's what he's referring to. So if we're going through the book of Kings and we're trying to think of what is it that the book of Kings is showing us, what is it illustrating, we already have seen that once we get to chapter 12 and 13 and we get to the kings of Judah and Israel, the divided kingdom. So we of course dealt with Solomon's temple at the beginning in Kings, right? Solomon's reign, the end of David's reign, and we saw the connection through the temple symbolism through that line. But it's when we get to chapter 12 and 13, especially to chapter 13, because of the prophecy of Josiah, we now have this connection to our history through the two 391s and a half, right? That brings us to, it ties all of those histories together into our history with the July 18, 2020 prediction. Now, we have then the unsealing of the seven thunders in our history. And even though Jeff was involved in that, he doesn't see himself personally. He doesn't get to see the full significance of this, the unsealing of the seven thunders, because we don't really understand it until after July 18, 2020. That is, we don't put together all of the pieces of the puzzle until after. And I always think that's unfortunate, that Jeff didn't have that insight. It's kind of sad, that happened, though it is part of the story, right, in the repeat of Millerite history. I wish that he would see it, that see the beauty of it all coming together. But now we're looking at this chronology that basically that started the whole thing. For me personally, it's the chronology of the kings of Judah and Israel, in where we put together this structure. Without the chronology of the kings of Judah and Israel, we can't count the 391 years and the 40 years, right? And that has been the problem that people have had in looking at Ezekiel chapter 4 and trying to determine, well, what period of time is the 390 days or years representing? Where does the 40 years fit in? And nobody has ever been able to do that, just for the simple reason they didn't have the correct chronology. They didn't have something exact. And often people also added them together. They tried to have a 430-year period. So that was a problem. But now we're going to be looking at this. And is it possible that as we go through, because what's being illustrated here, we have two parts of a nation. We have Northern Israel and we have Judah. And we've puzzled over it a little bit because, well, Rehoboam, he's Judah. We got the kings of Judah. It starts with Rehoboam. And we're going to see the kings of Judah through here, some good kings, some that choose to follow God, some that do various reforms, and then some of the wickedest kings, But Manasseh is a wicked king, but he's also converted, right, and a type of Christ. So the story, as we go through this, as we keep it in mind, is what I like to think about is what is the thread that we are looking at. Now, we could go back to the story of Joseph being sold into slavery, the separation of the two sticks and the joining of the two sticks. And that definitely is a huge part of this story. Now, another question, why does First Kings, because, we have Samuel and then we move into Kings. So we went through Samuel, now we're in Kings. But why does Kings start with Solomon? Like just as a structural part of the Bible, why didn't Chronicles finish with Solomon and then Kings begin with the divided kingdom? Why does it begin with Solomon and not with the dividing of the kingdom? I know this is a question you might not have an answer to, but because I don't know if I do. But it is kind of curious, isn't it? So one of the things we can see about the way that the Bible is written is it's not written in the way that man would suppose, right? It doesn't tell the parts of the story that man would tell. The purpose of the story, the purpose of the writing of the Bible is not to fill in all of the details. It's even though we have these chronicles, we're going to see some kings are dealt with in much more detail. Their stories are more significant than others. Some events are more significant. But they're not just that they're historically significant, that they're typically significant, that there's a bunch of types in here. And I don't think most people approach, even though we might know that all these things are in samples or types that were recorded in times past, people don't generally take it that way. Now, often people just take these as, if there's going to be any lesson, it's a moral lesson, right? But the history itself is just history. And we talked about that before, about dead facts, right? Yes, yesterday's almanac. And we don't take the Bible that way. So we're kind of departing from this story dealing with Rehoboam, or Jeroboam, I mean, and we've moved into these other kings. So we're going to go back to 15, because in chapter 14, because we had started moving ahead, we got this prophecy against Jeroboam, the death of Jeroboam, and then it talks about Rehoboam. And we probably should go over this, I guess, again, this part. So Rehoboam reigns in Judah. I think that's where we should start. And Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord did choose, out of all the tribes of Israel, to put his name there. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess. Okay, so of course he's Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and his mother. So why exactly Solomon has chosen Rehoboam to be king, I'm not certain. I'm just trying to find something here. Okay.
Do we have a list of Solomon's children?
I don't know. Do we have a list? That's kind of what I'm trying to find out here.
I don't think we do.
Let me see if I can find anything. Yeah, because why Rehoboam? Now, Rehoboam, his name, we looked this up before. I just don't remember. Oh, a people has enlarged. Okay, because we got the am part is the people part. Right, so that's the 5971 people. It's a congregated unit, a tribe, and then Rakhab means to broaden. Okay, yeah. So the Bible only names 3 children of Solomon: Rehoboam, a Taphath, a daughter of Solomon who married Ben Abinadab, the governor of the region of Dor, and Basemath, another daughter of Solomon who married Ahimaaz, the governor of Naphtali. So it's kind of peculiar because he's got 700 wives and 300 concubines. So yeah, I'd assume he had a few children, seems logical, right? But we don't really hear much about them. And we don't hear about like infighting, among Solomon's sons as far as who gets the throne. We have just the Rehoboam-Jeroboam issue. So is it possible that Solomon didn't have a lot of children? I guess it is possible. And only one son mentioned, which seems kind of peculiar. And if he had a lot of sons, wouldn't he have had a son that is, spiritual and more ready to take the throne than somebody like Rehoboam?
Well,
Dwight.
In this situation, when David had fled from Saul, didn't he turn also to an Ammonite king?
I don't remember who that would have been.
I'll look.
Yeah. I mean, I know he went to the Philistines. Yeah. So anyway, we don't have, and the thing that's peculiar about it is that often there is this fight for the throne. Now, it could be that the Bible is just not telling us all these other details because it doesn't tell us all the details, only the things that are pertinent. But, you would think in that 40 years that Solomon is king, that he, with all those wives and concubines, he'd have lots of kids. But the Bible's silent on that. It doesn't tell us that he didn't have lots of kids. It just doesn't tell us anything about it. Now, and also, the thing that's interesting here is he is 41 years old when he began to reign. So if Solomon reigned for 40 years, Shishak, yeah, we'll look into that. So Rehoboam would have been the eldest for certain, right? Based on the fact he's 41 years old.
Well,
even if there were other sons.
All right. So at this point, if Rehoboam was 41 when he began to reign, we know that Solomon was 18 when he began to reign. So in other words, he would have had to have been the likelihood would have been that he would have been the eldest son. I think that's what you're trying to make.
Yeah. Yeah, because Solomon would have been, 17 or something when he was born, when Rehoboam was born, right? Is that
Kind of
make
the
that
point
make
that I'm
sense?
making.
Yeah. So I don't think he had many kids before that. So yeah, so he definitely would be the oldest son. Now, but that means if that Solomon would have been married before he became king, and he had married an Ammonitess, right?
Correct.
Now we know that after he became king, he's going to marry an Egyptian princess, right? Is that correct?
Also correct.
But it doesn't tell us about him marrying, it just tells us that he has this kid. Let's see if I could get this here. I'm just trying to search for some of this here in the spirit of prophecy, if I can find anything about this. No, so Elmore doesn't say anything about this that I can find. She doesn't mention Naamah once in her writings. Okay, so we don't got any information on that. But yeah, so the mother's name is Naamah. We got loveliness. It says Ammonite wife of Solomon, mother of King Rehoboam, Judah. That's all we have there. Related word. Naam, pleasure. Okay, so Rehoboam, daughter of Naamah. Okay. Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord. They provoked him to jealousy with their sins, which they committed above all that their fathers had done. For they also built them high places and images and groves on every high hill and under every green tree. And there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations, which the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. Okay. So this is male prostitution is what it's referring to, not necessarily a location, because Sodom was destroyed. What is this? What is this? Like this. At the dividing of the kingdom, the death of Solomon, we now have all of this evil that's in the land. What is it symbolizing? What time is it? Is there any key that we can place this anywhere? Okay, well, it's just something to keep in mind.
If we
Now,
go to Second Kings 23:7, it mentions Josiah breaking down the houses of the Sodomites that were by the house of the Lord. That's significant. And look at the way the church is right now with this wokeness.
Yeah, but it must mean something more than that. I mean, we could take it literally in that sense, but there's some symbol here, is what I'm trying to point at. What it points to symbolically, not literally.
Well, clearly symbolically, I mean, at least the major thing is when we depart from God, then we have these perversions sexually and otherwise coming in.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's more literal. Like I'm saying there might be like a deeper symbolism here, because
probably,
it's sort of,
but I don't know.
Yeah, because obviously it's licentiousness of the worst kind, but there's something else there, I think, that we've just not thought about. Okay, and then this part that you talked about, it came to pass in the 5th year of King Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. Now, so this is something that this would be Sheshonq the first king of the Bubasite 22nd dynasty, ruled in Egypt during the reigns of Solomon and Rehoboam and attacked the southern kingdom. This is what the Brown's Driver's Brig says. Now, and we probably will look into this a little bit more later on, just because I don't have all of my documentation here just to confirm. So one of the things when we deal with biblical history, there are different opinions about these things of how to date some of this stuff. But I do think we need to look at this as some kind of anchor where we can place this, because we're saying this is in 977. Okay. Now we know that Edwin Thiel, he's going to cut 45 years off the kings of Judah, 45, 46 years, by creating all of these co-regencies because he has this imagined idea of how to line up his supposed Assyrian chronology with the biblical chronology. And so I do think it is something that, as a chronological anchor, that we need to understand, right? Because we have this, what's called the Synchronism, where we're tying the 5th year of King Rehoboam to an event that we would be recorded in history in some way. Well, we know if it's Sheshonq the first, right? Sheshonq, first king of the Buddha site, 22nd dynasty, which, I'm not an expert on Egyptian chronology. One of the things I know about Egyptian chronology is there are lots of opinions about it. If you have, 3 scholars, Egyptian scholars in a room, you're going to get 5 different opinions. So it's not something that's really anchored. Now, the person that I trust the most, is, especially in this period of Egyptian history, is Gerard Gerteau, a French Egyptologist who has done work that's very similar to mine, and he has 1533 BC for the Exodus and so forth. He departs when we get to the destruction of Jerusalem and the ladder end, but actually his chronology of the kings of Judah and Israel is almost identical to mine. Almost every detail. So just when we get to the end, that there are some things that he didn't notice with Jehoiakim and so forth. So that's something we're going to have to look at, who Shishak is and the chronology of it. Now, he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and he took away all that he even took away all, and then he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. So he took the treasures of the king's house, he took away all. Yeah, well, we'll look at that later, Angela, whether he's a Libyan and what that means, because we just don't know enough about Shishak at this point. So these shields of gold, and he's going to replace them with brazen shields, or shields made out of brass. So he made in their stead brazen shields and committed them unto the hands of the chief of the guard, which kept the door of the king's house. So what is the significance of these shields? We addressed it before when it talked about these shields being made. So we got these shields of gold. That's going to be in 1 Kings 16. And Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into one shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So what did we see in the significance of these shields of gold when we were reading there in 1 Kings chapter 10, which seems like ages ago? So we have 300 shields. So is there significance in that? So it says 200 targets of beaten gold. Each with 600 shekels of gold went into one target. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into one shield. And then we had some discussion about what a target was. So chapter 10. So this was Solomon's great wealth, right? So remember, we had looked at this, that he's going to get 666 talents of gold in 1 year, right? So we had studied that. And what was the significance of that?
The 666.
Okay, so we have the 666. Now the 666 becomes a symbol. Now here, if we think about it at this time, this is before the captivity of Babylon. So here we have this 666 number introduced in the Bible fairly early on. So what would be the significance of that? Is this the first time we have 666 that we know of? Stephen might know if he were here, because he knows all this kind of stuff. But I would say it's the first time. Now, we know that Ezekiel is going to use 666 years, not explicitly, right? but he's going to be having that second vision on the 6th year, the 6th month, the 5th day of the month, and it's going to continue into the 6th day, right? So it's going to have the 666 there, and he's going to predict, unwittingly, I suppose, the destruction of the second temple in the 666th year of Jehoiachin's captivity, his own personal captivity. And he is predicting the date of the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple specifically, in 586. So since we have Ezekiel making that prediction based upon his chronology, and we've already tied the later story, right? Not here so much the shields of gold, but that the shields of gold are taken away in the time of Rehoboam. Does that tell us something about a loss of understanding, a loss of understanding of prophecy that is removed?
I think it could be that, and also it's a declension of the kingdom from brass to gold. As the kingdom declines, knowledge of God is lost, good character are lost.
Yeah. So that's a diminution of something, but we're saying that those, now even these are not made out of 666 shekels. It's in that story where it talks about the money that he gets, and then he's going to make shields of gold, right? And obviously, if he's receiving that much gold and then he's making shields of gold, we can connect that 666 to the shields of gold, is what I'm trying to say, and that they're taken away. It has to do with part of that prophetic message being lost or neglected. Does that seem fair? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we touched on this, we probably did, but the shields also remind me of the charts, 300 published.
Yes, so this is exactly where I'm going here. Yeah. So if we look at the message of the 600, 6, that is a message that Miller had, right? So Miller dealt with the 600, 6, the 666, not as some kind of gematria, dealing with vicarious filii Dei, right? But he attached it to 666 years, which he's going to count from 158 to 508, right? So 158 BC to 508 AD. Right? So this 666 talents of gold that Solomon receives would be a symbol of the prophetic message, because 508 is one of the dates that was given Miller, right? Because from there he's going to count the 1335.
Well, 158 and 508 remind us of a league with Rome too. Like Rome is becoming quite prominent there.
Yeah.
Whole Rome, especially.
Yeah. Now, the main thing that we learned about the 666, so we recognize Miller 666 is correct, but we also recognize that there is two other periods of 666 years, right? So we have one that's going to go from 158 to 508, but we have one from 128 to 538. 129 from 129 BC to 538. So that one has to do with Jewish or the independence of Judea. It gains Judean independence in 129 BC. But the other one more significant, of course, is the one from Ezekiel, because that ties Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 together, the siege of Jerusalem by Babylon and the siege of Jerusalem by Rome together, with that symbol of 666 and the 36 years, right, at the beginning and the end, so Jehoiachin's captivity. And then that symbolized the Babylonian mysticism passing from Babylon to Rome, which then later is inherited by Papal Rome. That's why the 129 to 538 is important. Okay, so you have all of these three different periods of 666 years, that symbolize that. So it's an aspect of prophecy. So Solomon's great wealth here, this gold, the 666 talents of gold that he received in 1 year, he's going to use this then to build these targets of gold. Now, there's different words used for targets and shields and so forth. So here they're going to have 6793. So this word, and of course we're going to say that this relates to the charts, like the 300 shields. But there's 200 targets, and so we have to figure out what that means. So you got 200 targets of beaten gold, and 600 shekels of gold went into one target, and then 300 shields of beaten gold. So they're both of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went into one shield. A pound here is a manna, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So there's something there that I don't see, but okay, so he's going to use the word shield is magan or magina. That is a small one or a buckler, figuratively protector, also a scaly hide of the crocodile. So it's a defensive shield. And then we have these targets, right? I remember William asking about this when we looked at this. That's sinna, something piercing, a hook, a barb, meaning dubious, right? So they don't know what it means. Coolness, cold, snow, shield, buckler. So it's not really clear what these are. And it just seems that these would be pretty heavy. So I don't know if they're used for in a practical sense, right? But I'm not certain about it, because he's going to put him in this house of the forest of Lebanon. So it says in 1 Kings 7:2, he built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. The length thereof was 100 cubits, and the breadth thereof 50 cubits, and the height thereof 30 cubits, upon 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams upon the pillars. So what is this house? Is this just what is this? Why did he build this house? So he built his own house 13 years, right? And he built also the house of the forest of Lebanon. You know, it describes this place in a lot of detail. So foundation was costly stones, even great stones of 10 cubits and stones of 8 cubits. So I don't know much about this house of the forest of Lebanon, other than it's here, it's mentioned. Yeah. And then when it comes to the shields, remember we also saw in 2 Chronicles, it's going to talk about this same account. So the weight of the gold that came to Solomon 1 year was 666 talents of gold, same thing. And the king made 200 targets of beaten gold, 600 shekels of beaten gold went into one target, right? And 300 shields, maybe of beaten gold, 300 shekels of gold went into one shield. So there's some differences here, but he puts them also in the house of the forest. So what was the difference when we looked at this before? So this one's going to talk about 300 shekels of gold, but this one says with maybe 300 shields of beaten gold, 3 pound of gold went into one shield. So here the pound is 3 pounds. That's 3 mannas. And in the other one, in Chronicles, where did that go? Okay, I have to go there. Okay, so this one with the shields, let me see here. Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold, 600 shekels of beaten gold went into one target, and 300 shields made of beaten gold, 300 shekels of gold. So here is 300 shekels of gold went into one shield, and in the other one, 3 pound of gold. So this is a manna. So we got 3 pounds of gold, and the other one, 300 shekels, right? I think I could keep these in my mind. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. Does it not go there? 600 shields would be 600 shekels. So 600 shekels and 3 manas. So those would be the same thing, right? That was the point. So this is 50 shekels to a mana, right? Is that what we decided? So this is an example where we have 50 shekels to a mana for the Daniel chapter 5. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Okay, right? So if you have 3 mana is the same as 600 shekels. How are we doing this? What are we doing? How is that working out? Because it should be the same measurement. So 3 pounds or 3 mana. Now that would be, if you had 3 mana at 50 shekels, that would be 150 shekels. But this one doesn't say, so I'm still confused. So that's the targets that you have, 600. So this one says 300 shekels of gold. So if you had 3 pounds, that'd be 100 shekels per mana. 300 shekels of gold. The other one's clearly mana, this one shekels. So that's not right. That's why I'm confused. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but the shekels is added.
Okay, so what did we decide then? Because, yeah, hi, Stephen. I needed you here. Yeah, so what's going on here with the shekels between? So you got the three manas in First Kings regarding the shields, and in here it says you have 300 of gold went into one shield instead of 3 mana. Did we figure that out?
My understanding is it applies to a Becca.
So this 300, the witch, the Becca?
Yes.
Okay, so what's a Becca?
It's a half shekel.
Okay, so that would make sense. Because then you would have 3. So, but that would then make still 50 shekels to a mana, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's how we did it. I knew there was something. Now, how do we? So we just know that basically based on the numbers that it must not be a shekel, but a half shekel. Now, why would they use 300 half shekels? Is it to match the 300 shields? Is there some symbolism in there?
In Exodus, I think they were to give, everyone was to offer half a shekel.
Yeah. Okay.
Was contribution everyone was to make.
Yeah.
And you can sort of do the calculation there and see that that was equates to 50 shekels to a mana there.
Okay.
I don't think there's any direct.
It never says there's 50 shekels, but we can figure that out based on the math. Right.
Yes. Otherwise, you got 100 shekels to a mana here, and I don't think that's just consistent with other evidence.
Yeah, and there's no evidence that they ever put 100 shekels in a mana. Okay, so that clears it up. Now, we're looking at this symbolically. So we're looking in First Kings where the shields are taken away. That's in First Kings chapter 14, I think it's verse 26 or something. Yeah. And he took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He even took away all that he took away, even took away all, and he took away all the shields of gold which Solomon had made. And Rehoboam is going to replace them with brazen shields. And so what we are saying here is that this 666 talents that Solomon receives, he's going to make from that these shields, right? Not from all of it, but from some of it. And we're looking here at the taking away of these shields in the time of Rehoboam and the replacing with brass. So we have, one is there's 300 shields, and the 300 represents the charts, right? That's one symbol that it could be. But we also have the 666. So we're saying that there is, in Millerite history, these dates, 508, because Miller's going to apply that from 158 to 508. That's one of the dates that is the commencement of the chain of truth, right? He has 677, 457, and 508. So that's the last one, in chronologically speaking. And that, so that this, in this time, in the time of Rehoboam, however we're going to apply this, we have a taking away of these shields and a replacing of them with shields of brass. And brass can represent rebellion as well, but it's definitely a diminution from the gold to the brass. So that this has something to do, could this be the 1863 chart?
That would be logical.
Yeah. So it's where we, and definitely on the 1863 chart, we've removed some of the prophetic periods, even if they're hidden on there.
Sort of connecting with the 300 other charts, the 1843 and the 1850 charts. There's 300 of them.
Yeah.
So they're going to be replaced.
Yeah.
And then with the weight there being half a shekel, you can maybe connect that to the 2520 shekels that we find in Daniel 5. And then as part of...
Well, it's 2520 years. It's going to be 2520 years, 120.
Yeah, sorry, yes. Yeah. So it's 126 shekels, but 2520 gears. So that therefore connects to the chart as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this all ties together. And so if we're going to say that this is in Millerite history when the kingdom is divided, right? Yeah, so we have the kingdom divided, and we looked first, at the Jeroboam part of things, right? So we addressed all those prophecies, but now we're looking at the Rehoboam part of things, what happens with Rehoboam. Now, we had placed this, right at the beginning of Millerite history. But here, when we're dealing with the 5th year of King Rehoboam, that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. Is there any way that we can mark this in Millerite history, just as a symbol? Now, we haven't looked into Shishak yet. Historically, we will. But is there some way that we can apply this pillaging of the temple and the shields in the house of Lebanon, in the house of the forest of Lebanon? Right. So he took the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. So how would the king of Egypt have done that? What would he be typifying, and when? So, when we look here, we click on the name Shishak. What we have here is, right, it's just going to say King of Egypt, Sheshonq the first king of the Babusites, 22nd dynasty, right? So the southern kingdom under Rehoboam was apparently made it tributary, right? So we are going to have Judah is now under the protectorate of Egypt. Yeah, Dwight?
Yeah, I'm going to step back for just a second.
Yeah.
With what Stephen was saying, is it possible that the 300 golden shields are representing the 300 1843 charts?
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Okay. Now, the other thing earlier, we were talking about Rehoboam as Solomon's son being the son of an Ammonitess.
Yeah. Naamah.
Okay. I believe it's 1 Samuel 23 where David goes to the king of Moab for the safety of his mother and his father.
Yeah, the king of Moab.
So Solomon marries an Ammonitess, and I believe the Ammonites would have equated to a northern enemy, and David runs to a Moabitess, which would have been a to the king of Moab, which would have been a southern enemy, because they're both descended out of Lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that have anything to do with what we're looking at with all the rest of this?
I don't know. I don't know how many balls I can juggle at once in my brain.
10.
But it it definitely has something to do. I mean, there's significance there. That Rehoboam is this, that his mom was an Ammonitess. Whether we connect that specifically back to David and, in some way that helps us, I don't know. Do you have any ideas about what significance that would have?
Well, I'm looking at it. I mean, to me, it's a strange situation that David turns to the king of Moab, and Solomon marries a daughter of an Ammonite.
Yeah, I know, but how is that significant just prophetically as a symbol in what we're studying? That's what I don't know.
I'm trying to piece that together as well.
Okay. Yeah, so we're aware of those facts, how that affects this story as far as Rehoboam. Now, I'm going to look more into the Shishak thing. Stephen, do you know much about this Sheshonq the first or anything, if that's correct?
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into that.
Yeah, I have to look into the timing of that and see, because obviously if we understand this is 977 that Rehoboam comes. Now it's going to be in the 5th year. So 977 is the first year. 976. So that'd be 973 would be the 5th year, because we're doing an inclusive count. So you just take away from 4 from 977. So we've got this 5th year. Why it's the 5th year. Now, and the reason why we say the 300 represent the charts, both the 1843 and 1850 charts, there were 300 made each. So the taking away of the 300 shields of gold and being replaced with the shields of brass, that to me just becomes that there is a diminution of the prophetic message, and that would be 1863. But exactly how Egypt plays a part in that, how would we have Egypt play a part in, if we're going to apply it to Adventist history? What would Egypt be symbolizing? How would it have done that?
Well, they were denominated in 1863. They compromised.
Okay, so the connection to the world.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Egypt, the world.
Yeah. Okay, because they're getting the recognition of the world for their institution. Now, I'm one of those guys, I don't believe that the church should look to the state for, things like tax deductible receipts, whatever it is, charitable donations, or, have pay any attention to the church or to the state regarding like our schools and so forth. But the church has made that compromise really right from the beginning, though they might not have recognized it as a compromise. But it was one of those little steps that they take. And, a person could say, well, you're following the laws of the land. And there were some practical reasons for organizing and having a church hold property. So here's the problem. If the church had never denominated, never officially became a church in the state's eyes, it would affect the taxation system within the church, right? The money within the church. Does anybody really understand how that works? So churches are exempt from being taxed. But it's more than that, isn't it? Like this, when did the church start, giving out tax deductible receipts for donations to the church? Anybody know how that system works? I've had people explain to me, well, if we didn't do that, all the money would just be taken by the government, which it's true, some of it would, not all of it. Now, in the U.S., is a gift tax deductible? Because in Canada, if you win a lottery, it's not tax deductible. And if you give money to somebody, it's not tax deductible if it's a gift. Is that true in the U.S.? Dwight, you're in the U.S. Iran, William, do you guys know?
Looking at it, just a moment.
Well, you've never had to do your taxes?
I've never had to worry about tax deductibility of gifts.
Where if it's a 501c3, they have to, if it's over, I think 200,000 or something other, I think it gets taxed or something. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, in Canada, you can give somebody $1 million. It's not going to be taxed.
Okay, get it in the way that we would look at this. Gifts to individuals are generally not tax deductible.
Generally,
and are not taxable income to the recipient, though they may be subject to gift tax reporting if they exceed an annual limit. And as of last year, that was $19,000.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have any limit in Canada because you guys tax lotteries too.
Yep. Charitable donations to qualified organizations are often tax deductible, while business gifts are usually limited to a $25 deduction per recipient per year.
Yeah, it seems kind of like trivial.
Well, it's, in a lot of situations, it's just the further way in which the socialist state has been evolving.
Yeah. So if the church had never organized as a church, then the tithes and offerings would have been taxed, right? Is that the idea?
Well, not just the tithes and the offerings. They would also have been taxed upon their holding of property.
Okay.
Because, like in the state of Washington, you are required to pay personal property taxes.
Yeah. And some of it goes to education. In Canada, a lot of it's just education.
Well, they claim that.
We spend a lot of money on education.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying as far as Canada, I'm saying they make that claim in the U.S.
Yeah. But in here they do. I mean, they actually tell you the proportion that goes to education, and that's so property taxes contain an education component. But yeah, so you're saying that the churches held that property, it would be taxed, but church property is not taxed.
That is correct.
Okay.
It's like in this area, they have a retreat. They call it Camp Mivada. And where that retreat is right now, while it was purchased probably 70 years ago, right now it's become developed as not only a beautiful piece of view property, but it's worth multi-millions because of where it is.
Yeah, and so it'd be taxed a lot if it wasn't owned by a church.
Correct.
Yeah, so it's just kind of a strange thing that the state has done that the state has. I mean, I'm not a fan of taxes at all, whether they're property or, state taxes or federal taxes, income taxes or whatever. There's other ways to do things, but like user fees. Now, I mean, churches are using, the infrastructure of the state as well. I just don't see a problem with churches paying taxes, personally. In the sense of the state could do whatever they want, but the state has chosen not to tax the church, which I find. Is that the case everywhere in the world? That churches are exempt from taxes?
I don't really know about that, but what I really resent is the church schools adopting state curricula We know
Yeah.
what's going on in those schools now with Soji and all that other garbage. It's
Yeah, they have to
destroying our
follow.
children. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
very concerned about my grandchildren.
Yeah, so the church should never have ever taken state money for the schools, and sought accreditation. Now, of course, we live in a relatively free country here in Canada, unlike you guys in the U.S. But around the world, there isn't a lot of this freedom that we just take for granted with the church and so forth. There isn't, state. Some places you don't have, like, to have church schools can be quite difficult. The state controls education, and school attendance is mandatory. We don't experience that here. I know there's a lot of people who would want to get rid of homeschooling and force secular dogma on Christians. So we have freedom some places, we don't have freedoms other places. There's some places, you have a church, you would be in countries where you have to pay tax. So the church has chosen, though, to compromise by how they relate to the state. Now, back in 1863, I'm not sure how much taxes were an issue for the church. There was no income tax. You wouldn't need a tax deductible receipt. But I think their primary reason was it allowed them to, for the Civil War, not to go to battle. You could have a sort of, I can't remember the word for it, but some kind of an exemption, right? Because of religion, and you had to go through your church. The government didn't just recognize individuals saying, well, I have religious convictions against killing people. You needed to belong to a church in order to have a religious conviction, which I always found strange. It like, for instance, when I got a job at the hospital as a physio aide back in 1988, I didn't want to get I didn't want to pay to the union dues, right? But I couldn't do that as an individual. It had to be through my church. So my church has a position. But if I was just an individual saying I don't support unions, I wouldn't have legally had the right to not pay my union dues.
Well, there can be exceptions. There was one agency that wanted to hire me, and they did. And I told them flatly, I am not going to join a union. So the consequence was they would give me very few shifts. But there were a lot of people doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, but that wasn't really protect. So you got fewer shifts and you weren't treated as good. But in this case, with what they would do is they would take the money and it was put to a charity. They had charities that the hospital would support. And so it wouldn't go to the union, but you still had to pay it. But you couldn't just do that if you weren't involved in a church that had that set up, is the point. So, as an individual, I should be able to just say, this is my religious belief and I'm not going to do it. Though I also believe that you should have the consequences for your choices. Like, I don't believe that, the church should negotiate with the state so that we don't have the consequences for our choices. So that is, I have no problem if I choose to be a Sabbath keeper and it affects my job. I don't need the state to protect me. I will accept the consequences of what it means to be a Christian in keeping the Sabbath, right? Where some people want to have a religion where they don't actually have consequences for their choices, if that makes sense. So, okay, so we're going to have to come back to this tomorrow. Any final thoughts before we close with prayer? Dwight, you have a comment, or no? Stephen?
Not at this point.
Stephen, you have a comment?
Quite trivial. It's Shishak was supposed to have taken the Ark of the Covenant, according to the film Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, well, he didn't. So we know that. But okay, let's close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this day again and for the time that we've had to study. And the things you are bringing to our minds, help us to understand them and to apply them correctly. And we ask for your angels' care and protection today. Help us to trust fully in you. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.